Hiya, I'm Scully Sinful, your big bro, and 13 years ago I read Scott Pilgrim for the very first time. I was at a bookstore with my dad, and I was just looking for stuff to read. I remember reading and finishing a few comics, the typical stuff, Spider-Man, maybe a Batman comic or two, and then I picked up Scott Pilgrim, Precious Little Life. I binged the whole thing sitting on the floor of that bookstore. For whatever reason, I asked my dad if he could buy it, and the second one. When I got home, I read the second one and the first one again. I loved those books. When I first picked them up, Book 6, Scott Pilgrim's Finest Hour, had yet to be published. I devoured those books, and from when the last one came out, I read them all over again. When I say I love Scott Pilgrim, I really do. It has a vibe that hasn't been matched at any medium I found since, not in any game, movie, comic, or show. It's comfy but funny, filled with action, but takes its time to let the reader sit and feel with the characters. It's got a witty dialogue and just has a real rhythm to the story. When I heard that Scott Pilgrim was getting a movie, I was so damn excited. I went to watch it the same day it came out, and when I left the theater, I was a little underwhelmed. It had done so many things brilliantly, but failed where it mattered most. It failed to capture that same kind of magic the books had. The perfect blend of humanity, the songs were great, the casting was on point for everyone, except Scott, and it was overall a great time. Yet, I felt that the core of the series, the relationships, weren't fleshed out as well as they could have been. Although I understood why. It was just a movie after all. They couldn't feasibly fit 6 volumes worth of content into such a short runtime. Words cannot express the joy I felt when I first saw the trailer for Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. Imagine your favorite manga was finally getting the anime adaptation it deserved. I showed my wife the trailer with so much joy. I recognized the action set pieces, the fights, with the X's. I was really excited at the prospect of seeing Ramona and Scott date and fall in love. I didn't get that, and that's okay. Spoilers for all of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off and the comics. When I finished watching the first episode of Takes Off, I was confused but was also excited to see what might come of it. But I also felt deeply betrayed by the deceptive marketing and expectations that had been built up through trailers and interviews. If you had read the comics and watched the trailer, I wouldn't be surprised if you had come to the conclusion that we were getting a more or less similar adaptation of the books. I don't blame anyone for wanting this, by the way. I think it's only natural to want to see the books animated and to see if an adaptation could capture that vibe I talked about. A faithful adaptation is not what we got, but rather a sequel to the original series. I think. I'll cover this more as we talk about the series, but for now, just keep in mind that this isn't an adaptation of the books. The first episode is fairly similar to Precious Little Life. We meet Scott's friends, see him jam out with Sex Bomb, and get to see the first date with Ramona Flowers. There are little changes. Like Ramona works for Netflix instead of Amazon, and we don't get any scenes of Scott and knives. The biggest change comes at the very end of the episode where Scott is fighting Matthew Patel. Here, it seems like Scott dies, never defeating a single X. At this point, I was dumbstruck. Okay, they just killed Scott. There goes the faithful adaptation I was hoping for, but hey, maybe we get an interesting what-if story? What if Scott died? Then, well, Ramona has to deal with her League of Evil X's on her own. That could actually be pretty awesome. I went into episode 2 fairly curious about what we could get. The next few episodes are pretty great. We see Scott's funeral, and Emmy makes an appearance to make it one of the most kick-ass funeral concerts of all time. After the funeral, Ramona can't help but think that something seems off. She goes to bed and finds that she can still access his subspace highway. Somewhere, some way, he's still alive. Now, Ramona has a goal. Find out who took Scott. She starts investigating her evil exes, and now we get into the heart of the show. One of the things the show does wonderfully is show us more of the minor characters we fell in love with the comics. We see more of Knives, Kim, and most importantly, the exes. We also get to characterize Ramona a whole lot more, which is fantastic to see. We get lots of sweet scenes, so I'll just talk about my favorites. Let's start with Roxy. I love how they handled these scenes. The fight scene is awesome, with them diving in and out of movie settings, almost like the movie sets in the old Scott Pilgrim video game. They end up actually talking, and Ramona admits that she wronged Roxy and apologized for throwing their relationship aside. Matthew Patel's fight scene with Gideon kicked ass. That is all. I mean, look at this shit. It's so cool. Back to emotional encounters, the whole plotline with the Scott Pilgrim movie adaptation was really funny and a great time all around. Young Neil's obliviousness, Wallace's home-wrecking, Todd Sparks, and Ramona discovering her love for stunt acting. I actually think this was really cute since it seems like in the future timeline she stayed a delivery girl, but at the end of the series, in the epilogue, we see her working as a stuntwoman again, which I think shows a bit of personal growth. Oh yeah, the future timeline. If you were stunned by that, go back and watch the show, then come back, man. I loved everything they did with Gideon. or Gordon's character, they really managed to humanize him, which I didn't expect was possible for the same guy who in other timelines made mind control and emotional warfare. That's not even mentioning his exes that he cryogenically froze so that he could date him whenever he wanted. Yeah, they managed to make that guy pretty interesting. Gordon dates Julie and they kind of work together. Julie was always a little power hungry, so it kind of just made sense that she and Gordon got together. Seeing him be a loser slumming it around watching anime was also hilarious. I adore Gordon's bromance with Lucas Lee. Seeing them just hang out and be friends was a blast. It reminded me of when my friends and I used to shoot the shit and just goof off. Speaking of Lucas, I love how much of a bro and himbo this guy is. It was really cool to see more of him. Chris Evans did such a good job voice acting. I can honestly watch him play Lucas forever, man. Unlike the other lamer Chris, who doesn't know how to voice act at all. Enough about the exes. Let's talk a little bit about Ramona here. Can we just take a moment to acknowledge how good Ramona was in this? Ramona felt so warm. She seemed happier a lot more of the time, and when she talks about Scott, she seems genuinely happy and fond of him. One of the biggest reasons I disliked the movie is because it always seemed like Ramona felt inconvenienced by Scott. They didn't feel like they had any real chemistry, but here it's almost as good as in the comics. When they are together, it really does feel like they like one another and want to be together. I believe that they would fight for one another, and that's something really refreshing since we haven't seen that characterization since the comics and game. Speaking of Knives, I really appreciate what they did with her character. With Scott out of the picture, Knives is able to move on and pursues music. We get this beautiful, beautiful scene of Kim and her jamming out. They form a love of music and go on to make friends with the band properly as an individual rather than as Scott's old ex. The fact that she and Stephen Stills have cute moments making songs together also makes me really happy. There's a certain joy in making music that wasn't captured well in the movie, but I think was done amazingly here and in the comics. I like the theme of sparks. I think it's really cool to have a visual representation of chemistry. And I love the little scene towards the end of the show where Wallace meets Mobile and finds Sparks for the very first time. Like, that's just so cute. It's really good. All right. Time to talk about the big twist of the series. Scott isn't dead and he's been kidnapped. But by who? Future Scott. I cannot tell you how much I hated this when I first saw it. I did like the idea of a future version of Scott becoming an evil ex, but I strongly disliked how they presented it. Old Scott reverts back into his slacker ways when Ramona separates with him, which he interpreted as a divorce, but really it was just some time apart. Problem was, he never went to look for her. Here's why I had such an issue with that. This arc was pretty well done before, and to see Scott relapse into his ways just kind of throws out everything that happened when Ramona first left at the end of Volume 5. Did his wilderness sabbatical mean nothing? Did him accepting his faults and wanting to become a better person mean nothing? This bothered me for days, but I think I have an explanation. We all know that these timelines are separate. Each version of Scott Pilgrim exists on its own timeline. However, timelines do share similarities. At first, I thought the anime's OG timeline, the one where Scott fights all the exes, was similar to the movie timeline. This is important because while Ramona does disappear in the movies, it's because she leaves Scott for Gideon, meaning that Scott didn't have the time to grow as a person on his own. However, someone brought it up to me that the VR scenes the old Scott showed present Scott resembled the comics. I was destroyed. Did all that character development truly mean nothing? Are we just doomed to make the same mistakes over and over? Is there no hope for mankind? I spent days searching for an answer, for anything. I started documenting all the differences I could find. Ramona works for Netflix instead of Amazon. Funny detail, but not super significant. Scott makes a game reference when he meets Ramona. Cool callback to the movie, and a hint that like the two Sonics, there are two Scotts. I guess that does differ from the comic. At least comic Scott compliments Ramona's shoes rather than share a fact that he thinks is interesting. While cool and all, it didn't really help. Kim confirms that Scott did beat up the guys who kidnapped her in high school. In anime timeline, that's a real thing, but in the comics, it was a memory implanted into Scott by Gideon. Gideon's really different this time around. We didn't see his girlfriends or any mention of the glow. The glow. The glow was a crucial narrative device in the original that popped up whenever Ramona was stressed about her relationships. It was a visual indicator of the stress that characters could see. It would pop up whenever her exes were brought up or she feared something about her relationship with Scott. At the end of book 5, Ramona cuts and dyes her hair, and she had just found out about Scott's cheating with knives, and it sent her spiraling. We see her on the bed and Scott thanks her, and the glow brightens and brightens until she disappears. This leads to Scott spiraling as he loses all motivation, kind of similar to what's depicted with future Scott. Unlike future Scott though, Scott still has a support group of friends, and slowly he begins to recover from his trauma. He tries sleeping around, but that doesn't work. Eventually he visits Kim, who moved back into her parents' place, and together they go on a wilderness sabbatical. Unfortunately, he tries to kiss Kim, and she reveals that Scott was shitty to her. Scott begins to glow. He sees Nega Scott and tries to kill him in order to forget his shameful past. Nega Scott is a representation of Scott's bad traits, his selfishness, his inability to take accountability, and his lack of responsibility. Scott realizes that fighting Nega Scott, killing Nega Scott, won't change anything, and accepts that he's a shitty person. Now, knowing he's a shitty person, he's able to actually move forward as a person. Scott gets a job, he apologizes to his exes, and he's able to reflect back on his life. He's able to fight for Ramona and chases after Gideon. At the end, Ramona and Scott are able to admit that they suck, but hey, that doesn't really matter. They care about one another, and they want to make it work, so they try again. If the glow doesn't exist in anime timeline, then Scott never had a chance to confront his past, making the ways future Scott reacted to his separation with Ramona feel like it makes a lot more sense. As an older adult, he didn't have the same support system he would have had when he was younger, and never got to work through it in a healthy way, which is why he comes up with the childish idea to go back in time and prevent the relationship from happening. But that's just a theory. An anime theory! With that added perspective, I was able to enjoy the anime's ending way more. And it really is a badass ending. Scott kicks even older Scott's ass, Ramona becomes a time goddess, and present Scott and Ramona are finally able to get together. The music, the animation, and the stories of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off are all way better than they have any right to be. I can honestly say that this anime did a great job showing us more of the characters that we all fell in love with. As a long time fan of Scott Pilgrim, I can honestly say that Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is a terrible adaptation, but it is a kick-ass sequel. Thank you so much for watching the video. I've been Scully Sinful, your big bro. And if you liked the video, make sure to sub and tell me who your favorite Scott Pilgrim is. Mine's probably Kim. I'll see you guys real soon. Goodbye!